We know that Redis helps us to improve the response time from our server by a great extent, right? It helps us to get data in a very fast manner. So in this video, we will see a practical implementation of how we will reduce the response time of a particular endpoint in our application with the help of Redis caching. So this is the project which I have opened right here, which is running currently on my local host, as you can see. And in this application, we see that we are loading some data from our backend, like these kind of data. If I go to my products page, we can see that we have three products currently, which are being fetched from my backend. The data for these products are being fetched from my backend. So if I quickly inspect the page and go to my network tab, and if I quickly reload the page, I can see that I get a particular response, and this is the response, right? This is all the data that we are getting from our backend, and all this data is basically displayed in these cards. If we go to the timing section, we can see the time it has taken to return this data. And for this case, we have gotten a time of 123.30 milliseconds. So to get this data or to fetch this data from our backend to our client side, we are consuming a time of, or it is consuming a time of 123 milliseconds. If I reload it again, then it will be fetched again, and this time we are getting a time of 150 milliseconds. So on an average, like we can say that to fetch the data or to get this data from our backend or server, it is taking a time of approximately 100 to 200 milliseconds. Now our purpose in this video will be to reduce this time by caching our data in our Redis. So let's see the project structure briefly. So this is the client side right here, and this is the server. And in the server, I have an API gateway and various services. So it is a microservice architecture with various different services. Like we have the service, chat, listing, and user service. Microservice architecture is just nothing but we have divided various services and allocated different servers for various different services that we have. Now, in this video, we will be concerned more with the listing service. So if I go to our app, we can see that we are getting these products in our product page. So let us go to our product page in the client side. Now we can see that we are calling this particular function right here to get our product data. If I go to this function, we can see that here we are making the API call. And this API call is basically making a call to this particular endpoint, which is the slash listing endpoint. So if we go to our listing service and index.js file, we can see that this is the slash listing endpoint. And if I go to my route file, I can see that for the route, it is the controller. This is the controller which is being executed. So if I go to this controller, I can see the code right here. Now, basically in this code, what we are doing is we have a listing schema or a listing database, right? So from this listing database, whenever my that function for getting the data or getting these product data is called, this controller gets executed, and in this controller what do? We find the listings or we find the product data from our listing database, and if we find the data, we return it to our client side, and we also catch the errors in our catch block. So what we are doing is the normal approach. We are finding the data from our database. If we find the data, we return the data to our client side. So this was taking, as we saw, a time of 100 to 200 milliseconds to load this data. Now let us implement Redis in our structure. So to implement Redis, we need to define the config file. In the config file, we have the redis.js. So we have defined a Redis client, and then this Redis client can be imported here and used here. So this is the code for Redis. Here we have defined a cache key, and the cache key for this is listing colon all. So this is the key to which values will be assigned and data will be stored in our Redis. And then what we are doing is we are getting the data from our Redis if the Redis has data. So we are doing redis.get. And if the data is present in our Redis, it will be returned to the client. And if the data is not present, then we will again go to our main database and look for the data. So you can tell that it is the classical read through cache approach, where we first read through our Redis database, where we first read through our Redis database, and only if the data is not present in the Redis database, then we go to our main database. So like if the data is present in Redis, we get a cache hit and return the data. And if the data is not present in our Redis, we get a cache miss. And in that case, we can come back to our main database and then return the data normally. But the thing is, after we return our data, we also cache the data, or we store the data in our Redis cache memory, so that whenever this controller is called again, the data this time can be directly extracted from the cache memory. So initially the Redis is empty. Initially the Redis has no data, but once this get listing controller is called, then after what happens is we get a cache miss at first, and we return the database. We return the data normally from the database. But once after that, what we do is we load the data, or we cache the data in a Redis. So from the next requests, for the subsequent requests, we can return the data directly from the Redis database, because now the data is present in our Redis database. So after we have written the code for Redis, let us go to our site, and now we will see the difference in our response time. If we go to the inspect tab once again and open the network tab, if I open the network tab and now refresh the page, I can see that data got returned, and this is the data that we have. Now let's see the timing. Now we can see that it took 188.78 milliseconds to get the data, because this was the first read, and as we know, initially our Redis was completely empty, so it had no data. And if it had no data, it will be the normal method, so we would not, so we basically got a cache miss. And since the data was not present in Redis, we had to come back and look in our main database. That is why it took the normal time that it took before we had Redis. So we got a cache miss, and then we again came into our main database and looked for the data, and we returned the data, so we got the data right here. But now the difference is the data got loaded into our Redis or got cached in our Redis. So if I refresh the Redis GUI, I can see that now the data got loaded or cached in our Redis database. So from the next time, now if I again try to get the data, if I again refresh the page, the controller will be called again, right? But this time we will look for the data in the Redis. And since the data is present in Redis, it will directly return the data in a very short amount of time. So as you can see right here, this is the listing response and this is the response. But this time, if we see the timing, it is just 22.49 milliseconds. So from 180 millisecond, or like approximately 150 millisecond response time, we brought it down to 22 milliseconds, which is a drastical reduction in response time. And why did this response time reduce so much? Because this time we had the data in our Redis database or Redis cache. And so whenever we were calling this controller, this returned the data from our Redis. And since Redis helps us to access data in a very fast manner, therefore we got the our data in a very lesser amount of time. So from the subsequent requests, if I keep on refreshing, I can see that in our listing response we are getting the data in a much lesser time. Initially or earlier we had 100 200 milliseconds of response time, but now we are having the response time in two digits, and that too below 30 or below 20 most of the times. So this is 13 milliseconds now. Again, if I refresh it, I can see that again it is 11.59 milliseconds. So from a drastic or from a huge response time of 100 milliseconds, we brought it down to 10, 11, or 15 milliseconds, let's say. So we optimized our time, or we reduced the response time by a great extent with the help of Redis caching. So in this manner, we can reduce the response time of any endpoint in our application with the help of Redis caching. So this was the practical demonstration or implementation of Redis caching and how it helps us to reduce the response time.